I'm Allison Parker, 28, and I never thought my father could break my heart more than he already had. Then I told him about my cancer diagnosis. He laughed and said, "Maybe dying will make you interesting for once." I left his house in tears, questioning everything. That night, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I canceled the monthly payments that had been supporting his comfortable retirement for years. He never saw it coming. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If my journey of standing up to toxic family while fighting cancer resonates with you, hit that subscribe button to join me as I share how I found my voice when I had nothing left to lose. Growing up with Gerald Parker as a father meant living in an emotional desert. He wasn't physically abusive, but his coldness left scars that no one could see. He was the kind of father who attended school functions out of obligation, sitting stone-faced while other parents beamed with pride. My achievements were met with nods and immediate questions about what I could have done better. I remember bringing home straight A's in 7th grade, practically floating with pride as I showed him my report card. He glanced at it and said, "Shannon Miller's daughter is taking advanced classes. When will you be ready for those?" I tucked the report card away, the joy evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. My mother, Laura, had been the buffer between us. She would celebrate my victories in secret, whispering her pride when Dad wasn't around. "He loves you," she would insist. "He just doesn't know how to show it." I believed her because I needed to. Then came the worst day of my life. I was 14 when Mom died of an aneurysm, sudden and devastating. One morning she was making breakfast, humming as she flipped pancakes, and by afternoon she was gone. The light in our home died with her. Dad retreated further into himself after that. He threw himself into his engineering job, often not coming home until I was already in bed. We existed in the same space, but rarely connected. I became self-sufficient out of necessity, learning to cook, do laundry, and manage homework without guidance. I essentially raised myself through high school. Still, I desperately wanted his approval. I graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Boston University, and completed my degree in English with honors. Each achievement was a pebble tossed into the bottomless well of his indifference. After college, I secured a position as a technical writer for a software company. The job paid well but left my creative soul starving. I dreamed of writing novels, crafting worlds and characters that would move people. At night, I worked on my manuscript while my day job funded both my life in Boston and, increasingly, my father's. Dad had been laid off at 57. Too young for full retirement benefits, but old enough to face age discrimination in the job market. I couldn't bear to think of him struggling, despite our strained relationship. So I started sending money home, first small amounts, then more substantial sums as my career progressed. By 28, I was sending him $2,000 monthly, nearly a third of my income. Through it all, my best friend Hayden remained my emotional anchor. We'd met in college when we were paired as roommates. She was studying psychology and could see through my everything's fine facade from day one. "Your dad's approval is fool's gold, ally," Hayden told me over wine in my apartment the night before my diagnosis. "You keep digging, but the vein is empty." It always has been. I remember touching my right breast absent-mindedly that night, feeling the small, hard lump I'd been ignoring for weeks. Fear had kept me from making the appointment, but Hayden's insistence finally pushed me to call the doctor. The biopsy results came back positive, stage 2 breast cancer. The doctor, a compassionate woman named Dr. Wallace, laid out the treatment plan with gentle directness. Chemotherapy would start immediately, followed by surgery and possibly radiation. The prognosis was good, 80% survival rate, but the journey would be brutal. I sat in my car for an hour after receiving the news, paralyzed by fear and an overwhelming sense of loneliness. Finally, I drove to my father's house in the suburbs. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Hayden. Some childish part of me still believed that in this moment of genuine crisis, my father would finally be the parent I needed. His house was the same one I'd grown up in, now immaculately maintained with my financial support. He'd recently had the kitchen remodeled, a project I'd funded. The granite countertops gleamed as I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea I couldn't drink. "I have something to tell you," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Dad looked up from his newspaper, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it?" "I have breast cancer." The words hung in the air between us. Stage 2. I start chemotherapy next week. I waited for the shock, the concern, perhaps even the comfort I'd craved my entire life. Instead, his face remained impassive for a moment before a small, cruel smile appeared. "Maybe dying will make you interesting for once," he said, then chuckled and returned to his newspaper. The mug slipped from my hands, hot tea splashing across the table. He cursed at the mess while I sat frozen, his words echoing in my ears. I grabbed my purse and left without cleaning up or saying goodbye. The drive home passed in a blur of tears. By the time I reached my apartment, something inside me had hardened. The daughter who had desperately sought her father's approval for 28 years began to die that day, making room for someone stronger to emerge. My apartment felt foreign when I returned that night, as if I'd been gone for years rather than hours. I moved through the familiar space like a ghost, touching surfaces to ground myself in reality. The reality where my father had just mocked my cancer diagnosis. The reality where I might die, and he might not care. I collapsed onto my couch and finally called Hayden, my fingers trembling as I dialed. "He said what?" Hayden's voice rose in disbelief after I recounted what happened. "Ally, that's beyond cold. That's monstrous." "Maybe he didn't mean it that way," I said automatically, the reflex of a lifetime spent making excuses for him. "Stop it," Hayden cut in sharply. "Stop defending him. There is no interpretation where what he said is acceptable. None." Tears streamed down my face as the truth of her words sank in. "I keep thinking there must be something wrong with me," I whispered. "Some fundamental flaw that makes me unlovable to my own father." "The flaw is his, not yours," Hayden insisted. "Ally, you've spent your entire life trying to earn love that should have been given freely. And now you're literally keeping him financially afloat while he treats you like this." Her question lingered in my mind long after we hung up. That night, I barely slept, my thoughts cycling between fear of my diagnosis and rage at my father's response. By morning, exhaustion had crystallized into clarity. I made an appointment with my oncologist, Dr. Samantha Mitchell, for later that day. She was younger than I expected, with kind eyes that studied me carefully as I described my treatment options. "You seem distracted," she observed after explaining the chemotherapy regimen. "Is there something else concerning you about the treatment?" I hadn't intended to discuss my personal life, but something about her directness broke through my reserve. "My father thinks cancer might make me interesting," I said, attempting a laugh that came out as a sob. Dr. Mitchell's professional demeanor softened. "Unfortunately, serious illness often reveals the true nature of our relationships. Some people rise to the occasion, others fail spectacularly." "What if I have no one?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "You won't be alone," she promised. "I've seen patients create support networks in unexpected places. Sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the family we're born into." Her words followed me home, where I sat at my computer and opened my financial accounts. The evidence of my generosity toward my father was stark against the screen. Beyond the monthly transfers, I'd paid for home repairs, a new car 2 years ago, and even a vacation to Florida he'd taken with his golf buddies. Meanwhile, my own emergency fund was modest, and my writing dreams had been perpetually deferred as I directed extra income his way. I scrolled through text messages where he'd requested expected additional funds for various expenses, his gratitude perfunctory at best. What struck me most was the one-sidedness of our relationship. I supported him financially and sought his emotional approval, receiving nothing in return. Cancer had clarified this imbalance with brutal efficiency. With shaking hands, I drafted an email to my financial advisor, Jessica. "Please cancel the recurring monthly transfer to Gerald Parker's account, effective immediately. Additionally, I'll need to restructure my finances to prepare for significant medical expenses in the coming months." I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the send button. Was I being vindictive? Was this a heat-of-the-moment decision I'd regret? I closed my eyes and heard my father's laugh again, saw the dismissive flick of his newspaper as he returned to reading after shattering my world. I hit send. The immediate sensation was one of vertigo, as if I'd stepped off a cliff. Then came a wave of guilt. What kind of daughter abandons her father? But underneath both these feelings bubbled something unfamiliar: liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I had prioritized myself over my father's comfort. Jessica responded within the hour, confirming the cancellation and offering to set up a meeting to discuss financial planning for my treatment. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath, uncertain whether I'd just made the bravest or most foolish decision of my life. The phone call came exactly 4 weeks later, on the 1st of the month. I was sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing medical insurance forms when my father's name flashed on my cell phone screen. My stomach lurched, but I answered with a calm I didn't feel. What the hell is going on? Gerald barked without preamble. The money didn't come through. I took a steadying breath. I've canceled the transfers. You what? His voice rose in disbelief. Is this some kind of joke? No joke, I replied, surprised by my steady tone. I need to focus on my medical expenses now. There was a moment of silence before he exploded. You can't just cut me off. I have bills, responsibilities. What am I supposed to do? The same thing other people do, Dad. Work. Budget. Downsize if necessary. I'm 61 years old. Who's going to hire me at this age? His voice had taken on a panicked edge I'd never heard before. I don't know, I admitted. But that's not my problem anymore. Not your problem, he sputtered. I'm your father. The opening I'd been waiting for had arrived. Yes, you are. And when your daughter told you she had cancer, you laughed and said, maybe dying will make you interesting. Those are the exact words you used. The line went quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. You're overreacting, he finally said, his voice softer but still defensive. It was just a joke. You've always been too sensitive. A joke about my cancer, I repeated flatly. Do you hear yourself? Look, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, but cutting me off financially is an extreme response. What about family loyalty? Loyalty. I laughed bitterly. Where was your loyalty when I needed a father who cared whether I lived or died? That's not fair, he protested. Of course I care if you live or die. You're twisting things. I'm not twisting anything. I'm quoting you directly. My voice shook with emotion. For years, I've supported you financially while you've given me nothing emotionally. That arrangement is over. You ungrateful little, he cut himself off, then switched tactics. I raised you by myself after your mother died. I kept a roof over your head, food on the table. You did the bare minimum legally required of a parent, and now you want a medal for it? I was 14 when Mom died, and you checked out emotionally. I practically raised myself. So this is revenge? Is that it? No, Dad. This is self-preservation. I have cancer. I need my resources, financial and emotional, for myself right now. You'll regret this, he warned, his voice cold. When you come to your senses, don't expect me to forgive so easily. I closed my eyes against a fresh wave of pain. Even now, he couldn't see beyond himself. Goodbye, Dad. I hung up and placed my phone on the table, half expecting it to ring immediately. Instead, an hour of blessed silence passed before the next call came, not from my father, but from his sister, my Aunt Tracy. Allison? What's this about you cutting your father off? Tracy's voice was concerned but measured. She had always been the diplomatic one in the family. Did he tell you why? I asked. He said you had some medical issues and were being irrational because of stress. He's worried about you. I laughed humorlessly. Did he mention that the medical issue is cancer? Or what he said when I told him about it? Cancer? Tracy gasped. No, he didn't say anything about cancer. Allison, what's going on? I told her everything, the diagnosis, my father's response, and my decision to stop supporting him financially. As I spoke, her initial sympathy for her brother audibly shifted. That doesn't sound like Gerald, she said weakly when I finished. It's exactly like him, Aunt Tracy. You just haven't been on the receiving end of it. She was quiet for a moment. I'm so sorry, Allison. About the cancer and about my brother's behavior. What can I do to help? Her genuine concern brought tears to my eyes. Just knowing you believe me helps more than you know. After we hung up, my phone began buzzing with notifications. The family grapevine was clearly active. Cousins I rarely spoke to sent awkward well wishes about my diagnosis. An uncle left a voicemail suggesting I not make hasty financial decisions during this difficult time. My father's best friend texted to remind me that family is forever. The implicit message was clear. I was breaking an unspoken rule by withdrawing support from my father, regardless of his behavior. The expectation was that I would continue to bear his emotional abuse while funding his lifestyle, simply because we shared DNA. By evening, I was emotionally drained but resolute. I silenced my phone and tried to focus on what lay ahead. Tomorrow would be my first chemotherapy session. My father had called again, leaving a message saying he would be there for me during my treatment if I reconsidered my rash decision. The transparent manipulation only strengthened my resolve. I went to bed early, setting my alarm for the chemotherapy appointment I would attend alone. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized I was more afraid of the cancer than I was of facing life without my father's approval. Somehow, that felt like progress. The chemotherapy center was aggressively cheerful, with bright artwork on the walls and nurses whose smiles seemed permanently affixed. I was guided to a reclined chair in a room full of similar chairs, each occupied by people in various stages of treatment. Some looked relatively healthy, others wore the unmistakable mask of advanced illness. I wondered which group I belonged to, or if I existed in some liminal space between wellness and devastation. A nurse named Michael explained the procedure as he inserted the 4 into my arm. The first treatment is often the hardest because you don't know what to expect, he said kindly. Everyone reacts differently, but don't be a hero. If you feel sick, dizzy, or uncomfortable in any way, let us know immediately. I nodded, watching the clear liquid drip into my veins. It looked so innocuous, like water or saline, yet it was powerful enough to kill rapidly dividing cells throughout my body. Cancer cells, yes, but also hair follicles, stomach lining, and bone marrow. Salvation and poison in one colorless package. The first few hours were anticlimactic. I sat reading a novel, occasionally chatting with Michael or the elderly woman in the chair next to mine. By evening, however, the nausea hit with breathtaking intensity. I barely made it to my bathroom at home before violently emptying the contents of my stomach. This continued through the night, leaving me weak and shaking by morning. The following days established a brutal pattern. I would feel almost normal for a day or two after treatment, then crash into a valley of fatigue, nausea, and bone-deep pain that made even lifting my head from the pillow an act of supreme will. Working became increasingly difficult. My supervisor at the tech company was understanding, allowing me to work remotely on my good days and take sick leave on the bad ones. But the quality of my writing suffered, and the novel manuscript I'd been nurturing gathered digital dust on my laptop. Dr. Mitchell monitored my progress closely, adjusting medications to help manage side effects. During one particularly difficult appointment, she noticed my deteriorating spirits. "You're going through this alone," she observed. It wasn't a question. I nodded, too tired to elaborate. "Have you considered keeping a journal?" she suggested. Many patients find it therapeutic to document their experience. "I'm a writer," I said with bitter irony. Or I was, before cancer decided to occupy all my creative energy. "Then write about cancer," she said simply. "Write about what it's taking from you, what it's showing you, how it's changing you. Write the truth." The idea took root, though I didn't act on it immediately. I was too busy surviving. 3 weeks into my treatment, my father showed up unannounced at my apartment. I hadn't spoken to him since our phone confrontation, though he'd left several messages vacillating between guilt trips and awkward offers of support. I looked terrible, gaunt, pale, with noticeable thinning hair, and part of me wanted to refuse to open the door. But curiosity won out. "You look awful," were his first words as he entered my living room. "Cancer will do that," I replied flatly. "Why are you here, Dad?" He set a casserole dish on my coffee table. "Your Aunt Tracy made this. She said you might not be eating properly." I glanced at the dish, momentarily touched by Tracy's thoughtfulness, if not by my father's delivery method. "Thank her for me," I said, remaining standing despite my fatigue. I didn't want to invite him to sit down. He looked around my apartment, his discomfort evident. "So, how bad is it?" "The cancer. Stage 2. The prognosis is good if the treatment works." He nodded as if confirming a business transaction. "And the treatments are expensive, I imagine." And there it was, the real reason for his visit. Not concern for my health, but concern for his financial situation. "Yes, they are," I said, offering nothing more. "Look, Allison," he began, clearly rehearsed. "I know I said something thoughtless when you told me your diagnosis." I was shocked and didn't know how to respond. People say stupid things when they're caught off guard. It was as close to an apology as he'd ever given me, but it rang hollow. "You laughed, Dad. You made a joke about me dying." He waved his hand dismissively. "You're overreacting." It was a poor choice of words, I admit, but to cut me off financially over one comment seems extreme. "It wasn't one comment," I said, my voice rising despite my intention to remain calm. "It was a lifetime of comments. A lifetime of emotional neglect capped off by the cruelest thing you could possibly say in that moment." "Everyone has complaints about their parents," he countered. "You don't see them all cutting financial ties when things get tough. Most parents don't mock their children's cancer diagnosis." He sighed heavily, as if dealing with a difficult child. "I think the stress of your condition is making you irrational. When you feel better, you'll see this differently." The condescension in his tone was the final straw. "I need you to leave," I said quietly. "Allison, be reasonable. Get out." I shouted, then immediately regretted the exertion as a wave of nausea swept over me. He looked shocked, then angry. "Fine. Call me when you're ready to act like an adult." He stalked out, slamming the door behind him. I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up, my body rejecting both the chemotherapy and the toxic interaction with my father. Afterward, I lay on the cool tile floor, too weak to move, tears streaming down my face. That night brought a new milestone in my cancer journey. Clumps of my dark brown hair began coming out in the shower. I watched the strands circle the drain, carrying away another piece of my identity. I slid down against the shower wall and sobbed for my health, for my broken relationship with my father, for the novel I feared I'd never finish, for the life I'd put on hold. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed. Not just because of physical weakness, but because the weight of despair had become too heavy to bear. I didn't answer calls or texts. I didn't eat. I simply stared at the ceiling, wondering if the treatment was worth the suffering. Hayden found me there that evening, having used the spare key I'd given her years ago. She took one look at me and called Dr. Mitchell, who advised bringing me to the emergency room for dehydration. As Hayden helped me dress, her face tight with worry, I whispered, "I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to do it alone," she promised, supporting my weight as we walked to her car. "I'm right here. And I'm not going anywhere." "Are you sure about this?" I asked Hayden the next day, eyeing the electric razor in her hand with trepidation. We were standing in my bathroom, a bedsheet spread beneath us to catch the remaining hair that would soon fall. After my emergency room visit for dehydration and exhaustion, Dr. Mitchell had added antidepressants to my treatment regimen and strongly urged me to take control of the aspects of cancer I could manage. "Losing your hair is inevitable with your chemo protocol," she'd explained. "Many patients find it empowering to shave it off themselves rather than watching it fall out in patches." So here I was, with Hayden ready to play barber. "Absolutely sure," Hayden confirmed, plugging in the razor. "And I've got a surprise afterward." She worked methodically, her touch gentle as she removed the hair I'd always considered one of my best features. Long, dark waves that had once fallen to the middle of my back were reduced to stubble, then smooth skin. When she finished, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror, hollow-cheeked, with enormous eyes dominating my pale face. "I look like an alien," I whispered. "You look like a warrior," Hayden corrected, then pulled out her phone. "Now for the surprise. We're doing a photo shoot." For the next hour, she directed me through a series of poses, some serious, some silly, some downright defiant. She'd brought scarves and hats and temporary tattoos that we applied to my bare scalp. By the end, we were both laughing, and I felt a strange new confidence emerging. These photos documented the most vulnerable period of my life, yet they also captured an undeniable strength I hadn't known I possessed. "These are amazing," I said as we scrolled through the images. "I actually look powerful." "Because you are," Hayden insisted. "Now, there's one more thing we need to discuss." She handed me a flyer for a cancer support group that met weekly at the hospital. Dr. Mitchell recommended it specifically. She thinks you need more support than just me. I balked at the idea of sharing my experience with strangers. "I'm not really a group therapy person." "Just try one session," Hayden pleaded. "For me. If it's terrible, I'll never mention it again." Reluctantly, I agreed. The following Tuesday found me sitting awkwardly in a circle of chairs in the hospital's community room, a scarf wrapped around my bare head. The group was smaller than I expected, just 8 people of varying ages, all in different stages of cancer treatment. The facilitator, a social worker named Kevin, had survived lymphoma himself 5 years earlier. "We'll start with introductions," Kevin said warmly. "Share whatever you're comfortable with." One by one, the participants spoke. There was Maria, a 67-year-old grandmother with pancreatic cancer; Justin, a college student battling a recurrence of leukemia; Daphne, a kindergarten teacher with ovarian cancer, and others whose stories blended together as my anxiety mounted. When my turn came, I gave the bare minimum. "I'm Allison. Breast cancer stage 2. Recently diagnosed." Kevin nodded encouragingly. "And what brings you here today, Allison?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My friend made me come. She thinks I need more support than just her." A few knowing chuckles rippled through the group. The last person to introduce himself was a man about my age named Brandon. He had a scarf covering his head like mine, bright blue eyes, and an easy smile that belied the seriousness of his condition. "I'm Brandon, 32, stage 3 lymphoma. I'm a journalist, or was, before cancer decided to rewrite my story." His self-deprecating humor immediately put me at ease. Like Allison, I was dragged here against my will. My sister was convinced I needed to connect with fellow warriors, as she puts it. That was 6 months ago, and now I'm the one dragging new members in. After introductions, Kevin guided the discussion toward the week's theme: how cancer affects relationships. I listened as others shared stories of supportive partners, distant friends, and coworkers who didn't know what to say. When Brandon spoke about his girlfriend leaving shortly after his diagnosis, his pain felt familiar. "She said she couldn't handle the uncertainty," he explained. Which I get, in theory. But in practice, it felt like being abandoned when I needed support most. Without planning to, I found myself speaking. My father laughed when I told him my diagnosis. The group went silent. He said maybe dying would make me interesting for once. The collective intake of breath was audible. "That's messed up," Justin said flatly. "What did you do?" Maria asked, her grandmotherly face concerned. "I cut him off financially," I admitted. "I've been supporting him for years, and I just stopped." I expected judgment, but received nods of understanding instead. "Cancer has a way of clarifying our priorities," Brandon said. "It shows us who's really in our corner." By the end of the session, I felt a connection with these strangers that I couldn't have anticipated. They understood aspects of my experience that even Hayden, with all her compassion, couldn't fully grasp. I promised to return the following week. True to his word, Brandon approached me afterward. "First sessions are the hardest," he said. "It gets easier." "Does any of this get easier?" I asked, gesturing vaguely to encompass cancer, treatment, life. "Not easier," he reflected, "but different. You develop new tools, new perspectives." He hesitated. "Look, a bunch of us grab coffee after group sometimes. Would you like to join?" That coffee session led to an unexpected friendship. Brandon had been a features writer for the Boston Globe before his diagnosis forced him to take medical leave. His perspective on illness as a narrative, complete with conflict, character development, and potential resolutions, resonated with my writer's sensibility. "You should be writing about this," he said during our third post-group coffee. "Your experience is powerful," especially the family dynamic. People need to hear stories like yours. Who would want to read about my dysfunctional relationship with my father? Anyone who's ever felt betrayed by someone who should have loved them, he said simply. Which is a lot of people. Inspired by both Brandon and Dr. Mitchell's earlier suggestion, I began journaling my cancer experience. At first, the entries were private, raw outpourings of fear, anger, and grief. But gradually, I began crafting more structured pieces about specific aspects of my journey: the moment of diagnosis, my father's reaction, the first chemotherapy session, the head-shaving ritual with Hayden. I shared these writings with my support group, reading them aloud during our sharing time. Their responses were overwhelmingly positive. "You put into words exactly how I felt," Daphne said after I read a piece about the strange limbo of waiting for test results. "I could never articulate it like that." "You should publish these," Maria suggested. "They could help so many people." Brandon, with his journalism background, offered more concrete assistance. "Let me help you set up a blog," he proposed. "Nothing fancy, just a platform where you can share these essays if you want to." Together, we created The Cancer Chronicles: Surviving Disease and Dysfunctional Family. I published my first post about the head-shaving experience, with trembling fingers, unsure if anyone beyond our small group would care. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments flooded in from cancer patients, survivors, and family members. Many shared their own stories of relationship strain during illness. Some thanked me for articulating feelings they hadn't been able to express. Others simply offered solidarity and support. 2 weeks and 5 blog posts later, I received an email that would change the trajectory of my life. "Dear Ms. Parker, my name is Jessica Coleman from Linden Literary Agency. A colleague forwarded me your blog, The Cancer Chronicles, and I was deeply moved by your powerful writing and unique perspective on illness and family dynamics. If you've ever considered expanding your blog into a book-length memoir, I would be very interested in discussing representation. Sincerely, Jessica Coleman." I stared at the screen in disbelief, then immediately called Brandon. "Is this real?" I asked, reading him the email. "Do literary agents just email random bloggers?" "When the random blogger is as talented as you, apparently they do," he replied, his excitement palpable even through the phone. "Ally, this is huge." For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt a spark of hope that transcended my medical prognosis. Cancer had derailed my dreams of writing fiction, but perhaps it had opened a different door instead. Jessica Coleman's office was located in a converted brownstone in Cambridge, the kind of place that exuded literary credibility with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and framed book covers from successful clients. I'd chosen to wear a teal silk scarf around my head for the meeting, matching it with the most professional outfit I could still fit into comfortably. The chemotherapy had caused me to lose weight, and most of my clothes now hung loosely on my frame. "Your writing is exceptional," Jessica said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with a direct manner that I appreciated. Raw, honest, but also thoughtfully crafted. "That's a rare combination, especially in trauma narratives." "Thank you," I said, still not entirely believing I was having this conversation. "It started as therapy, really." "The best memoirs often do," she nodded. "They begin as healing for the writer and become healing for the readers. That's what I see happening with your blog already." She laid out her vision for the book, a memoir that would interweave my cancer journey with the exploration of my relationship with my father, culminating in the reclamation of my own narrative. "Publishers are looking for memoirs with a clear arc of transformation," she explained. "Your story has that in spades. You're not just fighting cancer, you're fighting for your sense of self-worth and autonomy." By the end of our meeting, I had signed with Linden Literary Agency. Jessica would help me develop a book proposal to send to publishers, expanding my blog posts into a cohesive manuscript. I floated out of her office, dizzy with possibility. Brandon was waiting at a nearby cafe, eager to hear how the meeting had gone. His cancer treatment had been progressing alongside mine, though his more advanced stage required a more aggressive approach. Despite this, he'd become my most consistent supporter outside of Hayden. "I have an agent," I announced, sliding into the chair across from him. An actual literary agent who thinks people would want to read my story. Of course they would, he said, his smile genuine despite the fatigue evident in his eyes. You're living through the hero's journey in real time. People connect with that. Over the following weeks, I divided my limited energy between cancer treatment, working on the book proposal with Jessica, and maintaining my blog. Brandon often joined me at coffee shops when both of us felt well enough, his journalistic experience proving invaluable as I structured my narrative. We'd work for as long as our strength allowed, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. Our relationship evolved naturally from support group acquaintances to friends to something more complex. Neither of us labeled it, aware that our medical situations made everything tentative. But his presence became a comfort I increasingly relied on, and I suspected the feeling was mutual. Then came the setback. 3 months into my treatment, Dr. Mitchell called me into her office, her expression more serious than usual. The tumor isn't responding to the chemotherapy as well as we'd hoped, she explained, showing me scan images I couldn't interpret but could sense were problematic. It's reduced in size, but not significantly enough. What does that mean? I asked, Brandon's hand finding mine as we sat across from her desk. He'd come with me to the appointment, something we'd started doing for each other when possible. It means we need to adjust our approach, she said. I'm recommending a more aggressive chemotherapy combination and moving up the timeline for surgery. The intensified treatment hit me like a freight train. The nausea became nearly constant, and fatigue, so profound I could barely lift my head from the pillow on bad days. Brandon and Hayden created a schedule between them, ensuring I was never alone for too long. They took turns driving me to appointments, stocking my refrigerator, and simply sitting with me when that was all I could manage. Despite my physical deterioration, work on the book proposal continued. Jessica had secured interest from several publishers who were excited by the sample chapters I'd provided. On my better days, I wrote from bed, my laptop balanced on a pillow, capturing the intensified struggle in real time. Use it, Brandon encouraged when I worried that my worsening condition would derail the project. Write about this part too. The setbacks are as important as the triumphs in your story. One afternoon, as I dozed on the couch while Brandon worked nearby, a knock at the door startled us both. He answered it, and I heard my Aunt Tracy's voice in the entryway. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said as Brandon showed her in. I tried calling first, but it went to voicemail. I struggled to sit up, embarrassed by my appearance and the state of my apartment. Aunt Tracy, this is a surprise. She took in my frail form, her eyes widening slightly before she composed herself. I brought some homemade soup, she said, holding up a container. And information. Brandon excused himself to give us privacy, promising to return later. Once he'd left, Tracy sat beside me on the couch. Your father is telling everyone you abandoned him during a financial crisis, she said without preamble. He's conveniently leaving out the cancer part, or his response to it. I sighed, too tired for fresh anger. That sounds like him. I've been setting the record straight when I can, she continued. But that's not why I came. I wanted to see for myself how you're doing, and to tell you I think you did the right thing. You do. I hadn't expected validation, especially from family. Gerald has always been self-centered, even as a child. Your mother balanced him out, kept his worst tendencies in check. After she died. She shook her head sadly. I should have done more to help you then. I'm sorry I didn't. You had your own family to worry about, I said, absolving her of guilt she didn't deserve. Still, I knew who my brother was. I should have checked on you more. She reached for my hand. But I'm here now if you'll let me help. Her support arrived at a critical juncture, as I was beginning to doubt my ability to continue fighting on all fronts. Having a family member, especially one from my father's side, validate my experience gave me renewed strength. That strength was tested to its limits when Jessica called with extraordinary news. Multiple publishers were interested in my memoir, triggering an auction that drove the advance offer well into 6 figures. The winning publisher, Beacon Press, wanted the completed manuscript in 8 months. It's an ambitious timeline, Jessica admitted. Especially given your health situation. We can try to negotiate for more time if needed. No, I said firmly. I can do this. What I didn't say was that the deadline gave me something concrete to live for, a reason to endure the brutal treatments. The contract was signed the same week Dr. Mitchell informed me that surgery could no longer be delayed. The tumor had finally responded to the intensified chemotherapy, shrinking enough to make a lumpectomy with sentinel lymph node biopsy the recommended next step. After surgery, we'll know more about whether radiation will be necessary, she explained. The pathology report will tell us if the cancer has spread to your lymph nodes. As I signed the surgical consent forms, I felt a strange doubling of my life, one half fighting for physical survival, the other half creating something that would outlive me if the fight was lost. The book contract felt like insurance that my voice would be heard regardless of the medical outcome. The night before surgery, Brandon came to stay at my apartment. We'd grown increasingly close during our parallel cancer journeys, though both of us had been cautious about defining our relationship. Too much uncertainty clouded our futures to make promises neither of us knew we could keep. "Are you nervous?" he asked as we sat on my small balcony, watching the sun set over Boston. Terrified, I admitted. Not just about the surgery itself, but what they might find. He nodded, understanding the weight of that uncertainty. "Whatever they find, we'll deal with it." I asked, meeting his gaze. He took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my skin. "Yes, we. If you want there to be a we." "I do," I whispered. "But it's not fair to you. My future is so uncertain right now." "Everyone's future is uncertain," he countered. "My cancer's more advanced than yours. If anyone's being unfair here, it's me." I laughed to spite myself. "Are we really competing over who has the more inconsiderate cancer?" He smiled, the expression lighting up his too-thin face. "I just know that however much time we have, whether it's months or decades, I want to spend it with you." That night, we slept side by side, finding comfort in simple proximity. In the morning, he drove me to the hospital where Hayden was waiting. The two most important people in my life would be there when I woke from surgery, whatever news awaited. As the anesthesia began to take effect, my last conscious thought was of the manuscript waiting to be written, a testament to survival in its many forms. The first thing I became aware of was the steady beeping of monitors. Then came the soreness in my chest, a dull, persistent ache beneath the fog of pain medication. I struggled to open my eyes, finally managing to focus on the figures surrounding my hospital bed. Hayden was closest, her face breaking into a relieved smile when she saw me awake. Brandon stood beside her, looking exhausted but happy. And to my surprise, Dr. Mitchell was there too, still in surgical scrubs. "Welcome back," Dr. Mitchell said, checking the monitors. "The surgery went well. We removed the tumor and 3 sentinel lymph nodes." "And?" I croaked, my throat dry from intubation. "Preliminary reports look good," she said cautiously. "The tumor margins were clear, which means we got all of the visible cancer. We'll know more when the full pathology report comes back, but I'm cautiously optimistic." I nodded, too overwhelmed for words. Hayden squeezed my hand while Brandon wiped away tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. "You did great," Hayden whispered. "Rest now. We'll be here when you wake up again." The next few days passed in a blur of pain management, brief walks around the hospital floor, and visits from the support group members who had become like family. Maria brought homemade blankets for both Brandon and me. Justin made a playlist of recovery songs. Daphne brought a stack of novels to distract me during the long hospital hours. On the third day, Dr. Mitchell arrived with the complete pathology report. "The lymph nodes show no sign of cancer cells," she announced. "That's the best news we could hope for at this stage." "What does that mean going forward?" Brandon asked, having appointed himself my medical information tracker. "It means we caught it before it spread beyond the breast tissue," she explained. "I'm still recommending a course of radiation to ensure we eliminate any microscopic cancer cells that might remain, but your prognosis is excellent, Allison. Over 90% chance of complete recovery." The wave of relief that washed over me was so powerful I thought I might float away with it. For the first time since my diagnosis, I allowed myself to fully imagine a future, finishing my book, perhaps even writing more books after that. A future that might include Brandon, whose own latest scans had shown significant improvement. On the day of my discharge, as Hayden helped me pack my few belongings, a nurse appeared at my door. "You have another visitor," she said. "A gentleman who says he's your father. Should I send him in?" I froze, unprepared for this development. Hayden looked at me questioningly. "It's your call," she said. "I can tell him you're not up for visitors." I considered the option, tempted to avoid the confrontation. But something in me had changed during my hospital stay. Near-death clarity, perhaps. "No, I'll see him," I decided. "But would you stay?" Hayden nodded, squeezing my hand before taking a seat in the corner of the room, present but giving us space. Gerald Parker looked older than he had during his visit to my apartment just months earlier. His hair seemed grayer, his posture less rigid. He carried a small potted plant that looked like it had been hastily purchased from the hospital gift shop. "Allison," he said, hovering awkwardly at the foot of my bed. "Your Aunt Tracy told me about the surgery." I nodded, waiting. For once, I wouldn't make this easy for him. "I brought you this," he said, setting the plant on the bedside table. "The saleswoman said it's easy to care for." "Thank you," I said neutrally. He cleared his throat. "How did it go?" "The surgery. The prognosis is good. No cancer in the lymph nodes." Relief flickered across his face. "That's good. That's really good." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "Why are you here, Dad?" I finally asked. He sighed heavily, seeming to deflate. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation. Tracy has been quite vocal about her opinions of my behavior." I could imagine. Aunt Tracy had become fiercely protective of me since her visit. "I wasn't a good father to you after your mother died," he continued, the admission clearly difficult for him. "I was drowning in my own grief and didn't know how to help you with yours." "That's not an excuse, just context." I nodded, acknowledging his words without absolving him. "When you told me about your cancer, I reacted terribly. Unforgivably." He looked down at his hands. I was scared, and I lashed out. "It's what I've always done." "But that doesn't make it okay." "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "I don't expect you to forgive me or to start supporting me again," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, truly sorry, for what I said and for not being the father you deserved." It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase decades of emotional neglect or the cruel words he'd spoken at my most vulnerable moment. But it was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "I can't promise anything right now, but maybe we can start with occasional phone calls and see where it goes." He nodded, accepting these limited terms with unexpected grace. "I'd like that." After he left, Hayden moved to my side. "Are you okay?" Surprisingly, yes, I realized. For the first time, I don't feel responsible for his feelings. Whatever relationship we have going forward will be on my terms, not his. 6 months later, I stood in a bookstore in downtown Boston, staring at a display featuring my newly published memoir, Maybe Dying Will Make You Interesting. A Cancer Survivor's Guide to Finding Your Voice. The cover featured one of the photos Hayden had taken the day we shaved my head, me with a defiant smile, scarf askew to reveal my bare scalp. The journey to this moment had been arduous. Radiation therapy had followed my surgery, leaving me fatigued but cancer-free according to all subsequent scans. Brandon's treatment had concluded as well, his lymphoma in remission though requiring vigilant monitoring. We had moved in together 3 months earlier, our shared experience of illness creating a bond that neither of us had expected but both treasured. My relationship with my father had evolved into something new, not the close-knit bond I'd once desperately sought, but a cautious, honest connection with clear boundaries. We spoke weekly, our conversations gradually becoming less strained. He had found part-time work as a consultant and had downsized to a smaller condo, steps toward financial independence that I quietly applauded. The memoir had exceeded everyone's expectations, earning critical acclaim and appearing on several bestseller lists. More meaningful than the commercial success were the messages I received daily from readers who saw their own struggles reflected in my story. "Ready for your big moment?" Brandon asked, appearing at my side in the crowded bookstore. His hair had grown back curly, a common post-chemotherapy surprise that suited his boyish face. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing down my own new growth of hair, now styled in a pixie cut that I'd decided to keep. The audience for my reading and signing filled every available chair, with additional people standing along the walls. I recognized several faces from the cancer support group, including Maria and Justin. Hayden sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Aunt Tracy had come, along with several cousins who had rallied around me during my treatment. And in the back, standing awkwardly but undeniably present, was my father. As I read selected passages from my memoir, I marveled at the strange alchemy of tragedy and transformation. My father's cruel comment about dying making me interesting had, in a twisted way, come true, though not as he had intended. Cancer had stripped away my people-pleasing facade and forced me to find my authentic voice. It had clarified which relationships deserved my energy and which did not. It had connected me with my chosen family and helped me establish healthier boundaries with my biological one. The irony wasn't lost on me that my father's worst moment had ultimately led to my greatest growth. Not because his cruelty was justified, but because it had finally freed me from the exhausting pursuit of his approval. After the reading, as I signed books and chatted with readers, I caught sight of my father hanging back, watching. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod that contained both acknowledgement and respect, something I'd sought my entire life, but had finally stopped needing to behold. "Your story gave me courage to stand up to my own toxic family," one reader told me as I signed her copy. "I never thought I could set boundaries until I read about your journey." "We're all stronger than we know," I told her, believing it with my whole heart. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to discover what we're truly made of." Later that night, surrounded by Brandon, Hayden, and friends from the support group, I celebrated not just the book launch, but the anniversary of my final cancer treatment. As we raised our glasses in toast, I reflected on how my father's cutting remark had indeed made me interesting, not because I was dying, but because I had chosen to live on my own terms. What painful relationships have you had to set boundaries with in your life? Has a health crisis ever clarified your priorities? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your narrative. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, sometimes our greatest strength emerges from our deepest wounds. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.